So this is the story of a bar stool. Actually, it's the story of 21 bar stools and 16 people. The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Woodcraft. Just get started. Most of the time when I build something, I sketch it out, I work out the joinery, I make the templates, and then I start building. Along the way, I naturally refine things, I might change a few dimensions to improve the design, and eventually the end result is a final version of the plans that I share with you. But if you think about it, the version that I build really isn't version 1.0. Yours is. You're the ones who build the better final iteration. But when it comes to this bar stool, the story is just a little more complicated. Last summer, I designed a lightweight woven top bar stool to match our kitchen remodel. I absolutely loved it, and I thought it would make a great guild course and YouTube video, so I filmed the whole thing and life was good. But then Nicole and I decided to host some classes here in the Firehouse shop, so we scheduled 3 sessions in January, February, and March, and the stool seemed like the perfect 3-day project. It was template driven, featured domino joinery throughout, and it felt like just the right mix of approachable and rewarding. The first class went really well, but I quickly noticed a few things that were tripping people up. So I took notes on how I could make improvements for the next class. I also received a lot of valuable feedback from the students themselves, and that really helped me shape how I would handle things in the future. One thing that I wasn't prepared for, however, was to receive an email from one of the first students, Alex, letting me know that his stool broke. I had to face a hard truth at that point. This design wasn't as bulletproof as I had thought. In my original build prior to the classes, 2 small dominoes were used to hold a pretty critical seat joint. To make the class experience just a little bit easier, I changed that to 1 larger domino. Well, it was definitely easier to make, but it also weakened the joint. I totally missed the fact that putting a mortise only about a 1/4 inch away from a big rabbet would create a significant weak point. And in the case of Alex's stool, you could see that the joint barely got any glue, so the failure was pretty much inevitable. With more glue in the joint, the results would have been better, but something like a bar stool needs to be structurally sound on its own and should not be dependent on glue. And as the instructor and designer, the failure was mine. So I went back, reworked the joinery to include 2 dominoes, and built additional supports and jigs that gave the students a little bit less room for error. The second class went as well as the first, but I still had some nagging doubts. What if someone didn't use enough glue again and I missed it? What if a joint was just a little bit too loose? What if someone leaned on the stool wrong after they bring it home? I mean, if a stool requires instructions for how to sit on it, can you really call that a successful design? I quickly realized that if I was going to ask other people to build this stool, I needed to trust it completely. So before the 3rd class, I redesigned it again. I used thicker stock in key places. I gave it a slightly wider stance. I employed larger dominoes, and at that troublesome double domino joint, I opted for 2 dowels instead. These will be just as strong as the dominoes, but it leaves a lot more wood intact, making the seat more durable overall. The stool gained strength, but also a little bit of bulk. The slimmer version might look more elegant, but I just couldn't live with the idea of someone getting hurt using a piece of furniture that I designed. Now, to be clear, I have 3 of the original in my own home. I trust them under the butts of my own family, but that particular design, the margin of error is just a little bit too small, and I can't count on every student being able to thread that needle. The new version carries the spirit of the original, but it's sturdier, safer, and if I say so myself, still beautiful. Now, because I don't design and sell furniture lines, prototyping usually isn't part of my process. But this project taught me the double-edged nature of iteration. I could totally see how people can go down a rabbit hole of trying to perfect a design. If you're building something over and over, it's almost impossible not to try to find ways to improve it every time. So after the final class, I found myself obsessing over ways that I might be able to shave the design back down, trying to make it appear a little bit slimmer again. It wasn't until my wife Nicole reminded me that sometimes you just have to pinch it off that I finally walked away. And so what you'll see today is the final version of this stool. This is the one that's the product of all of the classes, the redesigns, and the lessons learned. And the original footage that I filmed last summer, well, I guess the few clips that you saw here are about all we'll get out of it. And it'll go down as a very interesting lesson learned. Maybe one day I'll return to this design, but for now, this is where the journey ends. And I'm proud to share it with you. So here's how I made it. The material for this bar stool is 6/4 walnut. The goal here is to beef things up, and once milled, that lands at about 1.25 inches thick, plenty strong for all the butts. Using my Eon laser, I cut the templates for each part, and use those templates to help me pick the best grain. Once roughly laid out, I broke the stock down, and then ripped everything at the bandsaw. Now, if you follow me for a while, you know I usually recommend against milling everything to final size right away. The longer the parts sit, the more chance they have to move and cause problems. But in this project, things are going to move pretty fast. That's why it works so well for a 3-day class. Once the parts were milled, I trimmed them the final length at the miter saw. Quick tip for cutting small parts. If a piece can't reach your stop block, clamp a spacer in its place. Just remember to chamfer the back and the bottom edges so that the dust has somewhere to go and your cuts stay accurate. Now we can move on to the joinery for the seat. And I've got a tip for you. Since these parts nest together, it's best to do all your surfacing up front. A quick pass with the smoother gets them finish ready. If you wait until after cutting the joinery, sanding or planing is just going to loosen the fit. The curved seat rail gets a big rabbit on the end. I sneak up on the fit with a few test cuts, using the adjoining upper side rail as a reference. Once it's flush, I lock in the fence and cut the rest. Next, I notch the upper side rails with a 2-stop setup, again sneaking up on it until the seat rail drops right in. And this is where smoothing early makes sense, otherwise that perfect fit becomes sloppy later. Because the dado stack leaves a rough surface and the outer edge will be visible, I clean it up with a router plane. Not much material comes off, but the surface looks a whole lot better. And quick sidebar, if you've ever wondered how to bring hand tools into your power tool shop, my first book, Hybrid Woodworking, covers exactly that. You can find it at most retailers or grab a signed copy from us and get some Mark Cooties for free. With the seat frame dry assembled, I measure and cut the support rails to final length. This hidden rail is what the webbing will wrap around. It's also the part that gave me all of that trouble before, so this time I'm joining it with 2 small dowels. There are lots of doweling jigs out there, but Jessam makes one of the best. Now normally I just clamp it on and go, but after feedback from the students, I built a small support rig that would help them get more consistent results. You'll see me using rigs like this throughout the entire build. I'll use a similar support setup to drill the holes in the front rail. Then do a quick dry assembly of the entire top frame. That's looking pretty funky, fresh, and fly.
We are so old.
With that together, we can move on to the legs and the side assemblies. The legs sit at 6 degrees, so I cut that angle on the foot. The rail connecting the 2 legs also gets a 6-degree cut on each end. For shaping the upper side rail, I cut just outside the line at the bandsaw and then flush trim at the router table. You can use double-sided tape or the classic blue tape and CA glue trick, cat optional, or even better, make yourself a flush trim sled. The sled has the shape built right into the base and has extra material at the start and at the stop for safer routing. In the class setting, these were a lifesaver. With only 1 router table and 5 students, as well as oodles of parts, the sleds kept things moving without too many bottlenecks. Now I can lay out the joinery where the legs meet the upper side rail. I even made a template for this with a terrible dad joke included, of course. Mortises are cut with the domino, and I pre-glue the tenons into the top of the legs. That way they don't shift around and everything stays rigid for the next step. I lay the whole assembly down with clamps and push the lower side rail up until it stops. That gives us the exact mortise location which we can transfer before cutting. Another quick dry assembly helps catch any issues early. Now, someone recently complained that Oreo is too distracting in my videos, and we hear you, sir. So to that, I say, well, back to business. Time for the footrest. To give it some extra durability, I'm inlaying a strip of brass. I start by cutting a wide rabbet on the top of the footrest. I then sand the brass to remove any impurities and rough it up for a better glue bond with the epoxy. Tape-covered cauls are pretty great here since you really can't see much under the clamps and cauls, and I don't want to see any gaps when it's all said and done. For cleanup, I knock off the bulk of the glue with a block plane and level the brass with a card scraper. I avoid sanding at this stage because it's just too easy to dig into the walnut while you're trying to level the brass. But once that's done, I trim the footrest to length so that the ends are clean and ready for joinery. A quick test fit, and it looks pretty good. With the joinery complete, I can move on to shaping. As a general rule, I recommend keeping your parts square and oversized for as long as possible. It can really help with the joinery and registration, but once all that stuff is done, it's safe to do the final shaping. I did run into a small knot on one of my parts, but a dab of Titebond's Black Instant Bond CA glue filled it nicely. Now, this monster of a sled is for the curved seat rail, which has curves on both the top and the bottom. So I quite like how we're able to use one sled to tackle both of these profiles. Now, of course, a sled is safer, it's more reliable, and more repeatable than the various tape tricks that are out there, but it does take time to build, take some material, and toggle clamps aren't free. So it's up to you whether or not it's worth it. Now those upper side rails also get a subtle curved end grain profile. I'd rather not risk that at the router table, so I mark with a template and then shape it with a rasp and sandpaper. A belt sander can work here too, but be careful, end grain plus a belt sander is a recipe for disaster. And in class, most students who tried it, even with proper technique, found that they went too far, a little bit too fast, and changed the profile. Now at this stage, all of our edges are sharp, and that's no bueno, so I add an 1/8 inch roundover nearly everywhere, even across the joints. Because the side parts sit in a single plane, the roundover creates subtle shadow lines that really elevate the look. After routing, I smooth everything with backside sandpaper, because roundover bits almost always leave some chatter and roughness, so hand sanding makes the profiles look and feel perfect before finishing. And finally, it's time for a glue up. Starting with the top frame, I'm using Titebond's liquid hide glue because it's got a long open time and very easy water cleanup. Once dry, I scrape away any squeeze out and get the frame ready for finish. And yes, we're finishing now. Not only does this make final assembly easier, but the frame must be finished before we add the webbing, so we may as well do all of it now. You'll notice that the can of finish is taped off. Now that's not a passive-aggressive sponsor thing, it's just that at the time I was testing a new finish for a company and wasn't allowed to talk about it. But I am now, so this is a bit of a sneak peek at Natural One Coat's brand new single-component hard wax oil. You might remember Natural One Coat as they took the crown in my hard wax oil shootout a couple years ago, so I'm super excited to see this simplified formula and how it performs. Early tests are pretty promising. Stay tuned for more. Now just a quick tip, when wiping back oil finishes, I recommend using 2 rags. Your gloves will leave marks all over the place, so you always want a rag or a paper towel to be the last thing that touches the surface. I also use scrap boards with domino holes cut in them as drying racks. So like most hard wax oils, even this new formula, 1 coat is good, 2 coats is better. Once dry, I move on to the woven seat. I'm using polypropylene webbing. That's the same stuff you'll find on backpack straps. It's tough, it doesn't stretch much, and it reflects light in different ways, giving a really cool checkered effect. Plus, it comes in all kinds of colors if you want to go nuts. Now, I do have a systematic weaving method, and it's covered in detail in the full course, but the basics are simple. The long straps go on first, and then I weave in the shorter straps. I even messed one up, which shows why it's good to step back occasionally. The tunnel vision is real. Luckily, it's a quick fix. Beautiful! That's a nice woven seat. With the top done, it's time for the final assembly. I'm using epoxy here for the most working time possible. I start with the side assemblies, add the footrests, bring in the other side assembly, and then flip the whole thing upright, and then bring in the top. You'll notice I'm building a couple of these, which is why the webbing magically switched from brown to black. So I basically just add clamps wherever I can, with angled cawls taped in place where appropriate. Without the cawls, the clamps will kind of slip and slide around on the finished surface. So of course, squeeze out is inevitable, but since the wood's already finished, cleanup is pretty painless. Uncured epoxy wipes away quite nicely with white vinegar. Though if you rub it too hard, you might actually dull the finish, and thankfully, hard wax oils are very easy to refresh. After an overnight clamping session, I check for any flaws, that is, clamp marks, scratches, or maybe some glue that I missed. In fact, here's a spot of epoxy I was able to kind of slice and then scrape away using the chisel. I could then smooth it with a little bit of 220 grit backside sandpaper, and it's ready for more finish. And that's the beauty of these hard wax oils, repairs practically vanish. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this build as much as I did. I mean, I'm a little bit relieved to be done with this project, only because while students came to build it, it kind of felt like I built it as many times as the students were here. So it's a total of 15 samples that we had, plus the 6 that I made myself. It was a very interesting process. I don't normally stay within the world of a single project for as long as I did with this one, and it kind of gave me a glimpse into what like legit furniture makers must have to do on a daily basis when they're trying to come up with a design that they want to sell as many of these things as possible. How do you stop tinkering? How do you decide enough is enough? It's as good as it's going to get. Let me just, lock this in and continue to make this version. So this was really eye-opening. I do want to thank everybody who attended this particular class, and maybe apologize to the folks who came to the first class whose version of this stool is significantly different than the one that we have here, but it's just the way things developed. It's not that the first versions were bad, it's just hitting it so many times, I was able to see things that I normally wouldn't be able to see just doing one build, one run through, and producing a set of videos. Anywho, thank you for watching. See you next time.